Okay. So I had some introductory things before I got into like criterion for a solid rebuttal. We've covered most of it. Just like my sort of framework for this discussion is, I consider, and I think it's pretty incontrovertible, that the 2AR is the hardest speech in the app to give because of the time cutoff. You have 3 minutes to cover 6, which means basically the whole rest of the round is set up so that you can win the round as easily as possible in the 2AR. And that's kind of like my approach to giving rebuttals. I know a lot of people will try to shut the door before the 1AR. I'm not as familiar with how to do that. I think your objective in the 1AR is to provide yourself strategic options in the 2AR. So, okay, we're starting debates early. Efficiency in the 1AR. When you're writing blocks, I think like you need to have 3 or 4 good responses, and then a bunch of stuff that you don't necessarily feel like you can go for. Be able to trim those blocks down if necessary, but having those 3 to 4 defensive arguments, or those 3 to 4 really good arguments, you know you can go for any one of them in the 2AR. It's probably the best way to go. Oh, and in many cases, don't be tied to your blocks. Like, a lot of times people are breaking new negative strategies, or have done research on your case. You know your case better than they do. So chances are, if you didn't come across this damning piece of evidence in your research, it's not as good as they say it is. So I mean, use the fact that you know your affirmative. Okay. Yeah. So I just kind of came up with some criteria for a shutdown 1AR. This is just kind of general stuff, so I'm going to go through it kind of quickly against research. But one thing about a shutdown 1AR is it dictates to the negative what their strategy can be. This means in a couple of ways. You want to give them outs on the positions you don't want them to go for. This means you have a no link or not unique, something that they can just extend and say, okay, fine, position's gone, whatever. On the positions you don't want them to go for. If you want them to go for a specific, and bury them too on those positions. Like, if you can just smother them in defensive arguments, give them no reason not to kick out of a position that you want them to kick out of, that's good for you. But then on the arguments that you want them to go for, you want to give the appearance of undercoverage. You don't ever want to undercover a position, but you want to give the appearance that you have. Make those 3 to 4 good, strong arguments that you know and like and want to go for, and then in the 2AR, your options are open a little bit more. And you can go for just like the couple of arguments that you know you're going to win. Oh, and make them offensive. Make them resistable for you. Don't rely on a no link or a link mitigator as your go-to response to get out of a disadvantage, unless it's 100% terminal no link argument.
Does everybody know how to turn offensive? What are the 2 ways to do it?
When you turn an impact turn?
What do those mean? What's a link turn?
An impact turn, essentially, you're taking whatever their impact is your war or anything else, and you're saying that's good.
Sweet.
A link turn is showing that they're going to be arguing somehow that the plan caused some bad thing to happen, and then you make some argument about how the plan stops that.
Yeah, so for example, plan would spend a lot of money, and that would collapse the economy. Your link turn would be if the plan actually saves money in the long term or something like that, and so you end up saving the economy. What's the most important thing that you have to win if you are going to win a link turn? Brand new? Unique. All right. So everybody know what that means? Like if they say the economy is up now, or that there is not very much spending going on right now, and you make the argument that you save some money. If you don't win the argument that we're not spending any money right now, that argument doesn't matter. You're just doing more of what the status quo is doing, which doesn't really help you. That's why that turn would not be offensive at this point, or not be something that you can claim as an advantage. So it's strategic that if you're going to waste time making link turn arguments, you should probably have evidence that beats them on the uniqueness question. Okay, sorry, Mark.
That's cool. So yeah, making your 3 to 4 arguments that you're going to go for on a position, arguments that win you the round, either turns or theory or critical objections to their positions is a good idea. The more flexibility you have in terms of collapsing, the better off you are. And then obviously making filler responses is never a bad idea if you want to bury them or if you want to force them to cover. The thing is, even if you don't go for your defense, what it does is prevents the negative from telling a more coherent story in the one and up. Like, if you have 3 or 4 no-linked arguments, then the negative can't stand up and give an overview of the dissent and be like, we have 100% risk of this happening, because you've at least got some doubt in the mind of the judge and in the mind of the negative. It prevents them from telling that story as completely. It forces them to address those arguments in relating the story to the dissent, which disrupts the narrative process of the dissent. So yeah, maybe making those kinds of arguments, you don't have to go for them to be useful. And you don't have to make exceptionally good arguments for them to be useful. Obviously, you should make good arguments, but let's try. Okay, and kinds of things that might be included in that is like cross applications of the 1AC. They take virtually no time to make, and especially if you've got conceded portions of the case, those can be arguments that they have problems responding to. Sort of generic non-uniques, like, hey, we did 7 things to Cuba last week. Here they are. Those disrupt the uniqueness process, and again, force the negative to tell the story in such a way as your plan is specific to the problem, which a lot of negative debaters don't do. And then theory arguments. I know they kind of fell out of style. Like, when I was in high school, the kind of theory arguments to politics, like this is elitist or promotes weird research or fiat takes out the link, those arguments are unlikely to be persuasive, and I think especially in this community there's a really, really high threshold to vote on theory, or on affirmative theory anyway, theory is totality. But what those arguments do is force the negative to slow down and go in depth on those issues, and can draw a lot of time out of the 1C or 1R, and that's time they can't spend burying your good responses. Okay.
Putting arguments last, the better ones last, is also sometimes important. A lot of people spend a lot of time answering the top part of the flow, and if for some reason there's, like, depending on how they flow, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 and 7 are back here. 6 and 7 are phenomenal answers, and that person forgets to flip their flow over before they move on to the next piece of paper. I mean, it's a ball game. You've got sweep. I mean, I always put my turns at the end and had a bunch of, like, defensive answers at the top, just so if there's a risk that somebody's going to undercover things, it's more likely than not that they're going to undercover them at the bottom of the flow. One other thing I wanted to add real quick that Mark touched on a little bit earlier is block writing. You are a irresponsible debater if you hear an argument and not that night or at least by the next tournament have a block to that